Rico got the sauce.
Yeah, it's busting on my back, you better hide. Cause I cool with killers, they ain't scared to die. Won't fall in the folks, they go ride. Oh, you scared to death? When nigga, it's your time. Damn.
Waffling. Well, it's another culture war grift episode here. So today I want to talk about the game of telephone. You know, you pick up your telephone and then you're like, "Ayo, what's up?" And then someone responds, "Ayo, what's up?" You tell them their story, they receive the story, then they call Nancy on the other line and they add a little thing, a little spice, or they get a little piece of information just a slightly bit wrong, and suddenly the story changed. And this rinses and repeats over and over and over and over and over again until the story is completely unrecognizable or turned way more malicious than it should actually be. So this is a thing that happens constantly in the SBI story. Basically, whenever there's any news about fucking anything, there is a very good chance that there are certain people involved, that certain people wrote certain things, watched certain videos, but then they either leave out certain information, or they add too much, or they get to the worst possible conclusion of what someone could have meant with the saying. I want to bring up some examples of this. For one, in the original video on SBI, How Activism Poisons, you can see a rather detailed breakdown of what actually happened. You know, the GDC talk, where Kim Belair says her piece, about, terrify them. But then, it was conveniently left out that right after she said that she, said, "Hey, look guys, it's a joke." But she means it in a way that, she was trying to relay how marketers think. Because she herself is a marketer, has a marketing degree, and wants to convey to a group of people how a marketer brain functions.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
It does sound bad, doesn't it? However, when continuing her point,
because they have to consider, I say that out loud as a joke, but it's actually very, very true, because if you start to consider the people who are player and audience facing and who have to deal with mitigating harm and with keeping the sentiment around their game and their project positive, there's a genuine value that you could impress upon them with both ethically and financially. You could say this is important. And it's also a valid discussion to have, because if you're working with a very thin narrative budget and you work in AAA, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised or dismayed by the amount of money that marketing can give you. If you're not in AAA, and if you're indie or if you're freelance and you're building a budget because you still have to and you're writing up a pitch, I would say that you should consider adding the necessary funds for representation into your scope as you would any other item.
The context suddenly changes. And that's the classic example of the game of telephone. You watch a clip or someone takes it out of context first, and then hordes of people pick up that story and proliferate it, amplify it, and it goes out into the wild and you cannot take it back. This game of telephone here starts with my favorite grummy, obnoxious World of Warcraft developer, Mark Kern, aka Grummz. And it's about Dungeons and Dragons. So already we're off to the goof zone here. D&D was always inclusive. It wasn't popular at school and could get you bullied if you played. No one was turned away, and we had diverse tables, even when it was made by white dudes, as in the game was made by white dudes. Now that it's popular, these same white dudes are being excluded and vilified by wizards. Sick. So in case you don't know Dungeons and Dragons, he's not talking about real wizards, he's talking about Wizards of the Coast. This tweet here already is writing an interesting story, as in, oh, look at this. We have some kind of racism going on where white people are getting excluded at our tables. White people are getting excluded and vilified by the community, by Dungeons and Dragons itself. Crazy conclusion. And it makes one wonder, where does this come from? Good thing is, there is a quote, this was a quote tweet. He was quoting bounding into comics. So when we now click on bounding into comics post, we can read the following. Dungeons and Dragons senior game designer disavows how series was made by white dudes. Boasts that much of original material would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. Notice how there already is no mention of vilifying white people or excluding white people. The story changed. The game of telephone was played. So now, when we actually check out the article, the source is pretty much aligned with what was tweeted about. Dungeons & Dragons senior game designer disavows how series was made by white dudes, boasts that much of original material would never pass our inclusivity checks today. In delivering what is perhaps one of the most self-aggrandizing virtue signals in recent history, current Dungeons & Dragons senior game designer Jason Tondreau has taken to proudly touting the fact that much of the series' original materials, which he condescendingly writes off thanks to having been made by white dudes, would never pass inclusivity reviews today. Tondreau offered this take on the current state of the popular tabletop RPG franchise while speaking with official D&D content creator Todd Kenreck in promotion of Wizards of the Coast upcoming series-centric history book, Dungeons & Dragons: The Making of Original D&D 1970 to 1977. Then there is an embed which is not timestamped, shoddy work on your guys' part. Then, following a lengthy summary of the book's contents as well as his own history with the franchise, Tondreau was eventually met by the observation from Kendrick that it's important to note that this is a historical document. So there are things in there, it was a different time, so we've had an inclusivity review of all these materials. To which he enthusiastically replied, multiple. So let's take a step back here, let's clarify. There are materials in original Dungeons & Dragons that would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. Moving on a little bit, in the end you can see, yes, you read that right, Tondreau just dismissed D&D creators Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson as nothing more than ignorant is the keyword, white dudes. Following this insult he continued, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, there's a lot more material in this book, and I won't go all over it, but it would not pass our inclusivity review today. Yada yada yada. Basically, there are small little words added to the story here that are adding more meaning to what this person actually said in the interview than there was originally. The ignorant keyword there is very interesting. But as you can see, we still are not talking about vilifying or excluding white people from the game. It's interesting that Grummz came to this conclusion by reading this article. But we didn't watch the clip yet. So let's roll the clip. Roll it now. Let's roll it. Let's roll it.
And it's important that this is a historical document. So there are things, it was a different time. So we've had an inclusivity review of all these materials.
Multiple. So let's take a step back here. Let's clarify. There are materials in original Dungeons & Dragons that would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. And a lot of it is, some of it you can understand. Like, okay, these are a bunch of war gamers, and they're using armies from history. And so when they create a warrior class for Dungeons & Dragons, they call it the fighting man, right? Because that's what they were used to. And they were all men. They were all white dudes from Lake Geneva and the Twin Cities. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like, there's a lot of material in this book, and I won't go over all of it, but it would not pass our inclusivity reviews today. Well, we couldn't change it. It's history. What we can do is acknowledge it.
Oh, there we go. He didn't call these white guys ignorant. He didn't actually say much of anything that you could extrapolate like some racist intent out of. The only thing this guy said was that the game was made in a different time era, that, it was made by a group of war gamers. They tended to play, reenact, real wars, using real armies and stuff like that. That is why they came to some decisions calling a class the fighting man instead of the fighter. That's a thing which, in today's D&D, it's played by all sorts of people, so it would be kind of weird, especially in a game where you can freely choose what gender your character has, what background they have, whatever. It would be really weird to just have the fighting man class and the class description itself basically discriminating against potential women in the hobby to, you know, make a female character and also have a fighter class. That's an example that makes a lot of sense. Later on, you also added that, you know, the game was made by white dudes from the Twin Cities. And I mean, that's just further context of the game. When it was created, they didn't create it with the same wide-ranging cultural lens as they may take into account today. So it was a narrower perspective. It was a smaller subset of people, a very specific subset of people that created this game. That is not to diss the game in itself. I mean, he mentions the history is the history. It is what it is. A lot of the inclusivity reviews that we would do today wouldn't pass if the game was made today. Yeah, he's just calling it how it is in his perspective. There has not been a single racist statement uttered in this presentation. Essentially, the sentence that's the problem is him acknowledging that, you know, the people that made the game, that they have been white dudes from the Twin Cities. So, nothing burger. Literally a nothing burger. He later mentions in the clip, diversity was always a strength for Dungeons & Dragons.
D&D gets more diverse and has a larger audience every day. The more diverse the game becomes, the more people of different genders and ethnic backgrounds and faiths see themselves in the game. Then they go make their own versions of the game, and more players start to see themselves represented in the game. The more diverse the creators get, the more diverse the players become, and that's the way it should be.
And I think literally everyone that played that fucking game should understand why that makes sense. Everyone has a different outlook on life. Everyone has a different experience. And when we have a game that is filled with lore masters, with world builders, with writers, with sculptors and modelers and whatever, all sorts of creative people, this diversity is a strength. And this is something that made the game better. If you make a custom campaign, your own custom campaign, if you make your own characters with a specific background, if you, all of these things enrich the entire experience. And of course, depending on who your dungeon master is, there can also be negative points. Like for instance, if you allow every Mary Sue to just get into the game, that's a failing on the dungeon master's part. There is nothing unreasonable spoken here. It's a totally reasonable assessment that diversity helped the game over the years. Wizards of the Coast, I am not the biggest fan of that company. They are going into a weird direction with Dungeons & Dragons, and I honestly think that if you want to play the game, maybe get the rulebook, but then just don't fall into the monetization traps that they're trying to pull you into, and just focus on writing a good story, a good game for your players, and collaborate with your players and talk, have a back and forth. What do they want? You know, you don't need a digital tabletop, you don't, whatever. I'm not the biggest fan of Wizards of the Coast, but this characterization of what that company is and how they treat their white players is bogus shit. So, what's my grade? My grade is an F. It's an F again. Why is it an F? Very simple. They're saying that something is happening and it's not fucking happening. They're adding context, they're poisoning the well by adding in little keywords in their description of what we see in the clip. The ignorant white dudes. He just writes them off as ignorant white dudes, which is a pretty gross case of, you know, just assuming shit or adding on to when you really shouldn't. This is how the game of telephone functions. Someone makes a claim, makes a video, an initial video, an initial script, whatever. Someone else reads it. What happens then? Someone else listens to the recounting of another, recounts it again, and adds more fraudulent context. Context that doesn't actually exist. Yeah, the grade F goes to Bounding into Comics. You guys fucked up big time. but then also to Grummz. Well done, Grummz, for making this entire conversation even more schizophrenic. Like you always do, you suck. You know, you suck. Many thanks for sticking around, watching this video. If you want to know more about the Sweet Baby Inc. topic, but without the multi-track drifting, check out my video, Sweet Baby Inc. How Activism Poisons, on the first channel. Have a great day!
Niggas plotting, told them niggas slide. You pussy niggas out here scared of homicide.